Before the rise of the sun and moon, before even the elves walked beneath the starlit skies of Middle-earth, the world was still young, raw and filled with the echoes of its making. In these early days, long before the War of the Ring, or the forging of the great realms, the story of the dwarves began, hidden deep in the designs of a single Vala. Aulë the smith, one of the mighty Ainur, was the craftsman of the Valar. He loved the substance of the world, the shaping of stone, the working of metal, the rhythms of fire and earth. His hands longed to create, and his heart ached for children of his own, who would share his passion for craftsmanship, construction, and the deep secrets of Arda's bones. Yet the children of Ilúvatar, the Elves and Men, had not yet awakened. Aulë's impatience burned within him, not out of pride or defiance, but out of longing. So, in secret, he shaped the dwarves, short, strong beings of stone and fire, resilient and proud, unyielding as the mountains themselves. He gave them language and taught them craft. He made them hardy, so that they could survive in the most unforgiving places of the world, for Aulë knew not what trials awaited in the darkness. There were 7 of them, 7 fathers of the dwarves, each unique, yet bound by the strength of will and purpose that Aulë had bestowed. They were not born in the way elves or men would be, but crafted with care and set upon the earth, like the first sparks of a great forge fire. But Aulë's secret was not hidden for long. Ilúvatar, the One, saw what the Vala had done. He confronted Aulë and asked why he had made these beings. Aulë, humbled, answered that his desire was not to rival Ilúvatar, but to have beings to love and teach, ones who could understand the nature of the world through craft and labor as he did. Ilúvatar, wise and far-seeing, reminded Aulë that only he had the power to give true life. To test Aulë's humility, Ilúvatar told him that his creations were merely puppets, moving only because of Aulë's will. In sorrow and repentance, Aulë lifted his hammer to destroy the dwarves, but before he could bring it down, the dwarves flinched and cried out in fear. Ilúvatar had accepted them. Seeing Aulë's remorse, Ilúvatar had already breathed independent life into the dwarves, turning them from hollow shapes into living, thinking beings. They were no longer just the work of the smith, they were children of Ilúvatar in their own right, though not of the same destiny as elves or men. Yet Ilúvatar would not allow them to walk the world before the firstborn. As such, the 7 fathers of the dwarves were laid to sleep in hidden places beneath the earth, where they would slumber until the time came. Thus, the dwarves were bound by a special fate, not part of the music of the Ainur as originally composed, but folded into its harmony by the will of the One. When the stars were kindled, and the elves awakened by Lake Quivien, the dwarves stirred in their stone halls, deep in the secret places of Middle-earth. Each of the 7 fathers awoke in different places, though Durin the Deathless, greatest among them, is said to have awoken alone beneath the mountains of the Misty Mountains. There, he would found Khazad-dûm, later known as Moria, the mightiest of all dwarf realms. The other fathers awoke with companions, and from them the 7 houses of the dwarves were born. The Longbeards, Durin's folk, the most prominent and noble house, from whom came kings like Thorin Oakenshield and Dine Ironfoot. The Firebeards, the Broadbeams, the Ironfists, the Stiffbeards, the Blacklocks, the Stonefoots, while Durin's folk would dominate much of the known history of Middle-earth, especially during the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. The other houses would also shape the world in quieter, often more mysterious ways. Some dwelled in the far eastern lands, beyond the knowledge of elves and men, and their tales remain largely untold. Each house held a distinct culture and territory, but all shared certain traits: a deep love of craftsmanship, an unshakable loyalty to kin, a fierce memory for wrongs, and a natural distrust of outsiders, especially elves. Their lives were long, often reaching 250 years or more, and their beards were a symbol of honor, never to be shaven. They were not quick to forgive, but once a bond was formed, it was unbreakable. From their origin, the dwarves were both set apart and woven into the fate of Middle-earth. Unlike the elves, They did not seek the undying lands. Unlike men, they did not fear death in the same way. Their beliefs about the afterlife differed. Some said they would join Aulë in his halls after death. Others believed they would be reborn in cycles. Even the elves, with all their wisdom, did not fully understand the fate of dwarves beyond the mortal world. In the great tapestry of Arda, the dwarves were anomalies born of stone and flame, yet imbued with spirit. They were not the first, nor the last, but something in between. Proud, stubborn, and indomitable, the seven fathers of the dwarves would pass their traits down through the ages, shaping the identity of an entire people. The world they awoke into was not yet dominated by evil, but darkness stirred in far-off places. The dwarves, though unaware, would soon become both builders and warriors, carving halls into the hearts of mountains, forging weapons of unmatched strength, and ultimately standing against the rising tide of shadow. Their story was just beginning. In the deep places of the world, far from the forests of the elves and the open lands of men, the dwarves laid claim to their dominion, not in the light of stars, but beneath mountains, in echoing caverns, lit by the glow of molten forges and the shimmer of precious gems. From the seven fathers of the dwarves sprang the seven houses, each unique in lineage, yet bound by the same unyielding spirit gifted by Aulë. These houses would rise to power in distant strongholds scattered across Middle-earth, forging vast subterranean realms that would endure for thousands of years. Though most of the great tales of the dwarves focus on Durin's folk, the Longbeards, not all the seven houses dwelled in the west. Several made their homes far to the east, in lands rarely spoken of by elves or chronicled by the men of Gondor. The histories of those distant clans have faded into myth and mystery, yet their origins are no less noble. Each of the seven houses took root where their respective fathers awoke. Only Durin the Deathless is said to have awakened alone, without companions. The others were joined by kindred dwarves, perhaps placed there by Ilúvatar, so that they would not walk the world in solitude. As the centuries passed, these clans developed their own cultures, dialects, and territories. And while all dwarves shared a fierce loyalty to kin, their unity as a people was often tested by distance, pride, and ancient grudges. Let us now journey through the ancient strongholds of each house, the great halls of stone, flame, and memory that formed the bedrock of Dwarven civilization. 1. Durin's folk, the Longbeards of Khazad-dûm. The greatest of the seven houses was Durin's folk, the Longbeards. Their founder, Durin the Deathless, was the eldest of the fathers and lived longer than any other dwarf. He awakened at Mount Gundabad, and later migrated south, where he founded the mighty realm of Khazad-dûm, hidden deep beneath the misty mountains. This vast underground city, with its mighty halls, endless tunnels, and shimmering veins of mithril, became the crown jewel of Dwarven civilization. The Longbeards were master smiths, builders, and warriors. They traded with elves in the Second Age, forging a rare alliance during times of mutual benefit. Their kings, all named Durin in his honor, ruled for millennia. Yet Khazad-dûm's glory would not last. After the death of King Durin VI at the hands of the Balrog, Durin's bane, the Longbeards were driven into exile. But their legacy endured through new strongholds like Erebor and the Iron Hills. 2. The Firebeards and Broadbeams, masters of Nogrod and Belegost. In the First Age, two of the great Dwarven cities rose in the Blue Mountains, Nogrod and Belegost. These were the homes of the Firebeards and Broadbeams, respectively, situated in the western part of Middle-earth in Beleriand, and these strongholds were ancient even before the rise of the great elven kingdoms. The Firebeards and Broadbeams were among the first dwarves to interact with the elves of Beleriand. Though tensions existed, they maintained trade and occasional alliances. The dwarves of Belegost were the first to forge chainmail, and their craftsmen were second only to Aulë himself. They fought valiantly in the wars against Morgoth, even battling dragons during the Nirnaeth Arnodiad. But with the destruction of Beleriand at the end of the First Age, Nogrod and Belegost were lost beneath the sea. The surviving dwarves of these two houses fled east, some eventually settling in the arid Luin Blue Mountains, where they built smaller halls and quietly preserved their ancient traditions. 3. The Iron Fists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks, and Stonefoots. The eastern clans. Little is known about the Iron Fists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks, and Stonefoots, the four houses that awakened in the far eastern regions of Middle-earth. Tolkien left their stories largely unwritten, but traces of their existence remain. These dwarves dwelled beyond the maps, in vast mountain chains where no elf or man dared to go. It is said they built strongholds in the Orocarni, the Red Mountains, and perhaps in lands even further east. Their culture may have diverged significantly from their western kin, shaped by different landscapes and struggles. During the later ages, some of these dwarves migrated westward to join Durin's folk in their wars and rebuilding efforts, suggesting that ties of blood still bound them, however distantly. The Iron Fists and Stiffbeards were believed to be particularly warlike, possibly serving as mercenaries during dark times. The Blacklocks and Stonefoots, meanwhile, were reputed to be reclusive and stoic, with a deep reverence for stonecraft and tradition. Though much of their history remains shrouded in shadow, they undoubtedly played roles in the wider fate of Middle-earth, especially in the distant lands untouched by the War of the Ring. Dwarven culture and architecture across the houses, regardless of location or lineage, the strongholds of the dwarves shared certain defining features. Their architecture was monumental, carved directly into the hearts of mountains with precision that defied time. Halls were supported by towering stone pillars, floors inlaid with intricate geometric patterns, and walls etched with runes and carvings honoring ancestors and kings. Each house developed their own regional variations, some emphasizing elaborate tombs, others great forges, others fortresses of war, but all shared a reverence for stone and metal, and a relentless desire to delve deeper, to uncover the secrets buried beneath the earth. Dwarves did not farm or tend to animals as men or elves did. They traded for food, or took it by force when needed. Their wealth came from precious metals, gems, and craftsmanship. The greatest treasures of the dwarves were not merely gold, but items of skill and history, crowns, axes, and armor passed down through countless generations. The rise and fall of strongholds. Over the ages, many dwarven strongholds rose and fell. Some were lost to dragons, others to goblins or balrogs, and others to time itself. Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, would become a beacon of dwarven pride in the Third Age, until the coming of Smaug. The Iron Hills, undying, became a vital bastion during the War of the Ring. Even the glittering caves of Helm's Deep, though not a traditional stronghold, were claimed by Gimli after the war as a new home for dwarven excellence. No matter how many cities fell, the dwarves endured. Their strength was in their unity, even across vast distances. Whether from the Blue Mountains or the Red, from Khazad-dûm or the Iron Hills, the dwarves never forgot their lineages or their oaths. When called upon, they would gather not just as warriors, but as a people forged from the bones of Arda itself. In the next section, we will dive into the First Age, where the dwarves, though living in the shadows of elven song, played a powerful role in shaping the world, sometimes as allies, sometimes as adversaries, but always with fire in their hearts and stone beneath their feet. Long before it was called Moria, the greatest kingdom of the dwarves was known as Khazad-dûm, the mansion of the Khazad, the proud name the dwarves had for themselves. It was the first and greatest of all dwarven strongholds, carved deep into the roots of the misty mountains, by Durin the Deathless, the eldest of the Seven Fathers. According to dwarven legend, Durin came upon a valley, ringed by majestic peaks and mirrored by a still lake, so clear that he saw a crown of stars upon his head as he gazed into its depths. The dwarves named it Keled Zaram, the Mirror, and beside it, Durin founded a kingdom that would endure for thousands of years. Khazad-dûm grew, not upward, but downward and inward. Its majesty was not visible from the surface. There were no towering spires or mighty gates to mark its power. Instead, its strength lay in the mountain's heart. Hall after hall was hewn from the living stone pillars, like the trunks of ancient trees, bridges spanning bottomless chasms, and stairways that coiled endlessly into the dark. Forges roared without ceasing, and the sound of hammers echoed through its endless corridors. It became a realm of stone, fire and shadow, a living testament to the dwarves' genius and their tireless will. Durin ruled as its first king, and was said to have lived far longer than any other dwarf before or since. His people, the Longbeards, flourished under his guidance. They discovered a rare and wondrous metal deep within the mountain, filler, a silvery substance stronger than steel and lighter than a feather. Mithril was unique to Khazad-dûm, and the dwarves guarded its source with jealousy and secrecy. They called it true silver, and over the ages it would become a symbol of their wealth, their pride, and ultimately their doom. Though the dwarves kept to themselves, Khazad-dûm was not entirely isolated. In the Second Age, it was one of the few dwarven realms that maintained friendship with the elves, particularly the Noldor of a region, whose kingdom lay just to the west. The dwarves aided the elves in building great cities, and the elves in turn shared knowledge of jewelcraft and lore. Together they created some of the most exquisite works of art ever known. This alliance reached its height during the time of Celebrimbor, grandson of Fëanor, who forged the Rings of Power in a region. The dwarves did not receive the elven rings directly, but several of the 7 rings of power were later given to dwarf lords, gifts that would both enhance their skill and stir their greed. But such peace could not last. When Sauron, in his fair guise as Annatar, was revealed to be a deceiver and sought to claim the rings for himself, he unleashed war upon a region. The elven kingdom was destroyed, and its people were slaughtered or scattered. Many fled to the gates of Khazad-dûm, and the dwarves, honoring their alliance, opened their doors to them. However, with the destruction of a region and the growing power of Sauron, Khazad-dûm became more isolated than ever. The dwarves sealed their kingdom and turned inward once again, retreating to the depths of their mountain halls. Still, Khazad-dûm endured. Its kings, each named Durin in memory of the first, ruled over a realm of immense power and wealth. The dwarves continued to delve deeper and mine ever more mithril, seeking the purest veins buried beneath the roots of the world. They grew in pride and confidence, believing their realm to be eternal. No orc host could breach their gates, no dragon dared to challenge them. Their skills in metallurgy and stonework reached new heights. Their halls expanded beyond reckoning, and their treasures filled vaults that no outsider would ever see. But it was their digging too deep and too greedy that awakened what lay beneath. Far below the lowest mines of Khazad-dûm, the dwarves unearthed a terror from the ancient world, a Balrog of Morgoth, a creature of fire and shadow that had lain dormant since the fall of the Dark Lord in the First Age. Known later as Durin's Bane, this demon rose in wrath and slaughtered King Durin VI. His son Naina first attempted to reclaim the halls but was also slain. The survivors fled in horror, and Khazad-dûm was abandoned. The once great kingdom became a tomb, filled with silence, fire, and dread. No dwarf dared return for centuries. The name Khazad-dûm fell into legend, replaced by a new name whispered in fear: Moria, the Black Pit. Even so, the memory of Khazad-dûm endured in the hearts of Durin's folk. It became a symbol of lost glory, a paradise fallen into shadow. Many believed that one day a true heir of Durin would arise, one bearing his name and spirit, who would reclaim the ancient halls and restore their splendor. That hope lingered through exile and hardship, through the fall of Erebor and the rise of Smaug, through wars and wanderings. The dwarves did not forget. Much later, during the events of the Third Age, Balin, companion of Thorin Oakenshield, would lead an expedition to retake Moria. For a time they succeeded in establishing a foothold, and the old forges were rekindled. Yet the shadow was not vanquished. Balin and his people were slain by Orcs and the Balrog still dwelling within. The halls once again fell into darkness. Only after the fall of Sauron, when the Fourth Age began, would a new chapter be written. According to some accounts, Durin VII, believed to be a true heir of the Deathless, was born in the Fourth Age. Under his leadership, Khazad-dûm was finally reclaimed. The dwarves returned to their ancestral home, cleansed it of shadow, and the kingdom once more became a center of strength and prosperity. Khazad-dûm had always been more than stone and tunnels. It was the soul of the dwarves, the heart of their heritage. Forged by their greatest ancestor and lost to their deepest folly, it symbolized both the heights of their craft and the depths of their hubris. Even in ruin, it was revered. And in legend, it was never forgotten. As long as dwarves walked the mountains of Middle-earth, the dream of Khazad-dûm lived on, a memory carved in stone, echoing beneath the world. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm believed their kingdom to be eternal. Their halls had stood for thousands of years. Their wealth was unmatched, their defenses impenetrable, and their knowledge of stonecraft and metallurgy peerless. But deep beneath the majesty of their mountain halls, under the veins of mithril and stone, something ancient stirred, a remnant of a darker time, older than the kingdom itself, forgotten even by most of the wise. It was a creature born in the First Age, a weapon of Morgoth, and it slept beneath the mountains waiting. As the centuries passed, the dwarves continued to dig deeper, ever hungry for more mithril, the precious metal that shimmered like starlight and brought them riches beyond imagining. Mithril was incredibly rare and incredibly valuable, used to craft weapons, armor, jewelry, and heirlooms of surpassing beauty and strength. Only Khazad-dûm possessed it in abundance, and its mines descended further and further in search of its elusive, purest veins. But it was not only mithril that the dwarves uncovered. Far below the deepest delvings, their pickaxes and shovels disturbed something they did not expect, something they did not understand. In their quest for treasure, they awakened Durin's bane, a Balrog of Morgoth, one of the last of the fallen Maiar, who had served the first Dark Lord in the ancient wars of the world. It had lain hidden since the War of Wrath, buried under the mountains during the cataclysms that ended the First Age. When it awoke, it brought fire and shadow with it. The dwarves were caught unprepared. The Balrog descended upon them with a fury born of ages in slumber, its body wreathed in flame, its whip cracking like thunder in the deep. It slaughtered the dwarves indiscriminately, consuming all in its path. King Durin VI was the first to fall, and the kingdom mourned. He had been a wise and powerful ruler, beloved by his people. His death marked the beginning of the end. The Balrog would henceforth be known as Durin's Bane, a title that carried a weight of sorrow among Durin's folk. His son, attempted to rally the dwarves and reclaim their halls, but he too was slain, just a year after his father. With both king and heir dead, the surviving dwarves faced a grim reality. Their once glorious city was no longer a home, but a tomb, a black pit ruled by flame and fear. They had no choice but to flee. One by one, the ancient halls of Khazad-dûm were abandoned. The dwarves who escaped scattered to distant lands, some to the Iron Hills, others to the Grey Mountains, and still others who would later found Erebor, the Lonely Mountain. Their great capital was lost, their pride shattered. The gates of Khazad-dûm were sealed, and the name was changed. It was no longer Khazad-dûm to outsiders. It was now Moria, the Black Pit. For centuries, Moria was left alone. Few dared venture into its depths, and those who did rarely returned. Rumors spread through Middle-earth of a terrible power beneath the mountains. Orcs began to infest its upper halls, drawn to the ruins and the darkness. They multiplied in the shadows, establishing their own hold within the abandoned stronghold. But even they feared to go too deep. The Balrog ruled the lowest deeps, like a slumbering god, silent and unseen. The fall of Moria marked a turning point for Durin's folk. Their greatest city lost, their people scattered, They would spend generations trying to reclaim what had been taken. But the shadow of Durin's bane lingered over them like a curse. It was a reminder of their pride, their greed, and the cost of delving too deep. And yet, the dwarves did not forget their home. The memory of Khazad-dûm remained etched into their hearts and songs. Its splendor lived on in tales, its wonders spoken of with reverence. It was more than a city. It was the soul of their people. One day they vowed they would return. That hope was rekindled in the Third Age, when Balin, one of Thorin Oakenshield's companions during the quest of Erebor, led an expedition to reclaim Moria. With a small company of brave dwarves, he ventured into the Forgotten Halls. For a time they succeeded. The western halls were cleared of orcs, the forges relit, and Balin declared himself Lord of Moria. It was a bold dream, a beacon of defiance against despair. But dreams in Middle-earth often die hard. Within 5 years, Balin and his company were overwhelmed. The orcs returned in force, and worse still, the deeper evils of Moria stirred again. The dwarves were slaughtered to the last. Balin was shot by orc archers, and buried in a stone tomb beneath the chamber of Mazarbul. A final, desperate message was scrawled in the Book of Records. Drums in the deep. We cannot get out, they are coming. Centuries later, the Fellowship of the Ring would pass through Moria, guided by Gandalf. There they too would encounter the ancient terror that had haunted the dwarves for so long. Durin's bane attacked them on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, and Gandalf alone stood to face it. Their battle shook the mountain. As he cast the Balrog into the abyss, he too fell into shadow. The Balrog's final defeat came not from dwarves, but from Gandalf the Grey, who died in that battle and returned as Gandalf the White, reborn to continue the struggle against Sauron. And so, the terror that had haunted Durin's folk for over 1,000 years was finally destroyed, not by axe or hammer, but by the fire of divine will. Even in its defeat, the Balrog had left an indelible scar on Dwarven history. It had cast down kings, destroyed a kingdom, and haunted a people. Its name remained unspoken in Dwarven halls, a symbol of hubris and loss. Yet the dwarves endured. Though broken, they were not defeated. The memory of Khazad-dûm continued to call to them, and legends told that one day, a new Durin would rise, a Durin 7, who would lead his people back into the deeps, cleanse the halls of darkness, and rebuild the glory that had once been lost. And so the story of Moria, the fall of Khazad-dûm, the rise of Durin's bane, and the desperate dreams of return, became one of the greatest and most tragic chapters in the long saga of the dwarves of Middle-earth. When the doors of Khazad-dûm closed for the last time in the wake of Durin's bane, the Longbeards became a people without a kingdom. What had once been the proudest and most powerful of the 7 houses of the dwarves, now wandered across Middle-earth, broken and scattered. Their golden halls were lost, their greatest treasures buried beneath shadow and ruin, and their kin slain by flame and darkness. But the dwarves did not fade quietly. Though displaced and diminished, they carried with them their memory, their craft, and their unbending will to endure. The years that followed the fall of Moria were years of exile. The surviving Longbeards, Durin's folk, traveled far and wide, seeking refuge in unfamiliar lands. Some went north to the Grey Mountains, a vast and inhospitable range between the Misty Mountains and the Iron Hills. There they built halls anew, carving out fresh strongholds in the cold stone. Others went east to the Iron Hills, a range that had long been home to dwarves even before Moria's fall. These hills would become one of the last strong bastions of dwarven strength in the east, ruled by hardy kings who kept the old traditions alive. Still others wandered, becoming smiths, miners, and mercenaries across the free lands of Middle-earth. Dwarves became a familiar but increasingly rare sight in the realms of men. They sold their skill for gold and built quiet forges in distant cities. But no matter how far they traveled, their hearts were always tied to the past, to Khazad-dûm, to its glory, and to the promise of its return. For many years, the Grey Mountains became the new center of Dwarven activity. Several Dwarven lords established kingdoms among the peaks, and for a time, the wealth of these mines brought hope. But the mountains held their own dangers. Dragons, those ancient enemies of the dwarves, stirred once more in the north. Great beasts, drawn by the scent of gold and the deep rumble of forges, descended upon the Grey Mountain strongholds and ravaged them. Many dwarves were slain. The kingdoms fell one by one, until those who remained abandoned the range entirely. From these ashes, a new hope emerged. In the year 1999 of the Third Age, Thorin I, a descendant of Durin, led his people to a lonely mountain, rising from the plains north of the Long Lake. There he founded a new kingdom beneath the Lonely Mountain, or Erebor, and declared himself king under the mountain. The discovery of rich veins of gold and other metals brought wealth and prosperity. For the first time since the fall of Khazad-dûm, the dwarves had a proper home. Under the leadership of Thorin and his descendants, Erebor flourished. The halls of the Lonely Mountain became renowned for their beauty and craftsmanship. Dwarves crafted golden ornaments, weapons and armor of unmatched quality. Trade flourished with the neighboring men of Dale, and together they created a small but vibrant civilization in the northeast. But the wheel of fortune turned once more. In the year 2770, Erebor's prosperity attracted the gaze of Smaug the Golden, one of the last great dragons of Middle-earth. He descended from the northern wastes in a storm of fire and fury, laying waste to Dale and slaughtering all who stood in his path. The dwarves of Erebor were caught off guard. Many perished. King Thorin and a small band of survivors escaped through secret passages, but their kingdom was lost. The great halls were seized, and Smaug made the mountain his lair. Once again, Durin's folk became exiles. Thorin wandered south, broken and bitter. His people followed him, becoming vagabonds across Middle-earth. They found brief refuge in the arid Luin, the Blue Mountains, far to the west, where remnants of the ancient Firebeards and Broadbeams still lived. There the survivors of Erebor settled in small halls and tried to rebuild their strength. But Thorin could not let go of his ancestral pride. In 2790, he traveled east to reclaim Khazad-dûm alone. What happened next would ignite a war. In the dark halls of Moria, Thorin was slain by Azog the Defiler, an Orc chieftain, who desecrated the king's body and mocked the dwarves with his defiance. When the news reached Thorin II, Thorin's son, it sparked a fury that had been simmering for centuries. The War of the Dwarves and Orcs began, an unrelenting campaign of vengeance waged by all 7 houses of the dwarves against the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. Every stronghold and tunnel was scoured, every Orc lair destroyed. The war culminated in the Battle of Azanul-Bizar, fought before the gates of Moria itself. The dwarves won a costly victory, but many great warriors, including Thorin's heir Thorin, were slain. Though the Orcs were crushed, the dwarves did not reclaim Khazad-dûm. The Balrog still lingered in the deeps, and the price of another attempt was too high. Thorin returned to the arid Luin, with what remained of his people. The memory of Moria still haunted them, but so too did the loss of Erebor. The years that followed were filled with quiet sorrow. The once great house of Durin was now a scattered people. Kings ruled over halls no larger than outposts. Their pride remained, but their strength had faded. During this time, Thorin vanished, while on a secret mission to reclaim Erebor. Captured and imprisoned by Sauron in Dol Guldur, he was tortured and broken, his ring of power taken. His son Thorin Oakenshield inherited nothing but a name and a dream, and it was Thorin who would finally ignite the flame of restoration once more. Though that tale belongs to the next chapter, it was born from this age of wandering and hardship. The dwarves had lost their cities, their wealth, and their kings, but they had not lost their memory. Every forge lit in exile, every sword sharpened in the dark, every song sung in stone halls far from home. They were all whispers of what once was, and what could be again. This was the age of Dwarven Diaspora, not an end, but an interlude. Their decline was not death. It was the drawing back of a hammer, just before it falls. Beneath the solitary peak of the Lonely Mountain, the halls of Erebor once rang with the clang of hammers and the murmur of golden streams. The dwarves of Durin's folk had found a new home there, a shining kingdom carved into stone, rich with treasures and trade, with allies among the men of Dale, and unmatched prosperity flowing from the mountain's roots. For nearly 2 centuries, Erebor stood as a beacon of dwarven pride and power, a second Khazad-dûm in all but name. But in Middle-earth, wealth is rarely left unchallenged. News of the dwarves' growing treasure hoard did not remain secret. Whispers of their gold drifted north, carried on the wind like the scent of blood, and in the cold, ruined wastes beyond the withered heath, something ancient stirred, something with a hunger that had been gnawing for centuries. Smaug, the last great fire drake of the north, awoke from his long slumber, drawn by the lure of riches beyond imagining. The year was 2770 of the Third Age. Erebor in its prime was unsuspecting. There had been no war, no siege, no warning. When Smaug came, he did so not as an invader, but as a cataclysm. The dragon descended from the northern skies like a storm of fire and death. His wings blotted out the sun, his roar cracked the stones, and his breath scorched the sky. The dwarves, caught off guard, had little chance to mount a defense. The front gates were breached. The watchtowers crumbled beneath flame. The forges went silent. Smaug's assault was not one of conquest. It was one of greed. He cared not for thrones or titles. He sought the hoard. The king under the mountain, Thorin, had amassed staggering wealth. Mithril, gems, goblets, armor, and crowns, piles upon piles of gold that glittered in vaults deep within the mountain. It was this treasure that Smaug sought, and this treasure that he claimed. The dragon tunneled into the deeps of Erebor, coiled himself upon the treasure hoard, and made the mountain his lair. Most of the dwarves were slain. Others fled through secret passages, narrow, twisting tunnels known only to a few. Thorin, his son Thron, and grandson Thorin were among the survivors. They escaped into the wild, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the crushing weight of failure. Outside the mountain, the destruction did not stop. Smaug turned his fury upon Dale, the prosperous town of men that had grown rich from trade with the dwarves. Its wooden homes stood no chance against dragonfire. The city was reduced to ash, its people scattered. The survivors fled to the shores of the Long Lake, where they would one day establish the town of Esgaroth, or Lake Town. Within Erebor, Smaug settled atop the treasure hoard, like a god of wrath and ruin. He knew the mountain's halls now better than the dwarves themselves. He did not leave, did not conquer beyond his claim. Erebor became a darkened tomb, and the memory of its splendor became a tale of caution. The impact on the dwarves was devastating. This was their second exile, within living memory. First Moria, then Erebor. Twice they had built great kingdoms. Twice they had lost them. Their pride was deeply wounded. Their people scattered once more. Many returned to the arid Luin, living in modest halls among the remnants of the Firebeards and Broadbeams. Others became wanderers, smiths for hire in foreign lands, or silent hermits in the wild. Yet the story did not end there. King Thorin, broken and grief-stricken, wandered the land until he met his fate in the halls of Moria. His son Thron inherited the burden of his people, but his heart was weighed down by the cursed longing for Erebor. When he disappeared on a journey east, captured and tortured by Sauron, the line of kings seemed doomed to vanish into darkness. Only Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thron, remained. Thorin had fought at the Battle of Azanulbazar, wielding an oak branch as a shield after his was broken, hence his name. He had seen the horrors of war, the loss of home, and the long despair of his people. But in his heart, the flame still burned. The memory of Erebor's shining halls haunted his dreams, and the image of Smaug lying atop the stolen legacy of his forefathers ignited a fire that would never be extinguished. Though Thorin grew up in exile, he did not forget who he was. He gathered strength, wealth, and reputation, slowly drawing followers around him. Among them were dwarves who shared his vision: Balin, Dwalin, Fili, Kili, and others, all bound by lineage and loyalty. Thorin dreamed of reclaiming Erebor, of restoring his people to their rightful home, of driving the dragon from the halls of his fathers. But even Thorin knew that no army could challenge a dragon. For years the dream of Erebor remained a bitter longing. The dwarves sang of it in secret, spoke of it in whispers, toasted to it in exiled feasts. They did not forget, they never would. But Smaug remained too powerful, too deeply entrenched. It seemed that the dragon's tyranny would endure as long as he lived, until by a twist of fate, a strange opportunity arose. The wizard Gandalf the Grey, ever watchful of the shadows growing in the east, saw in Thorin's desire a chance to remove a great threat. A dragon guarding a mountain of gold could become a terrible weapon in the hands of Sauron. If Erebor could be reclaimed, and the dragon slain, it would not only restore the dwarves, but remove a danger that threatened all of Middle-earth. Gandalf proposed a daring plan: a small company, not an army; a stealthy quest, not a siege. With the help of a burglar, an unassuming hobbit named Bilbo Baggins, Thorin and his company would set out on a journey to reclaim the Lonely Mountain. It would be a mission of desperation, hope, and legend. That story, the tale of the Hobbit, would become one of the great adventures of the Third Age. But at its heart was the long shadow of Smaug, the tyrant who turned Erebor into a prison of fire and silence, the usurper of a dwarven legacy, the symbol of everything lost. Smaug's presence defined an era of despair for Durin's folk. He was not merely a beast. He was a living embodiment of the dwarves' deepest fears: the fear of failure, of displacement, of helplessness in the face of overwhelming power. But from that fear, and from the ashes of Erebor, would rise a courage that even the dragon could not anticipate. The reclaiming of Erebor would be no simple matter, and the cost would be great. But for the dwarves, for Thorin, and for all those who remembered the golden halls of old, it was a risk worth taking. Their story was far from over. In the long years following the fall of Erebor, the longing of Durin's folk did not fade, it deepened. The dwarves became a people of exile and memory, their songs rich with sorrow and pride, their halls quiet, but filled with the echo of old hopes. And none bore the weight of that legacy more than Thorin Oakenshield, the exiled heir to the throne under the mountain. Thorin was a warrior of noble lineage and iron will. He had survived the sack of Erebor as a boy and grown up in the wandering years that followed. He had fought valiantly in the war of the Dwarves and Orcs, leading his kin at the Battle of Azanul-Bazar, where he earned the name Oakenshield by shielding himself with a branch after his shield was broken. Though the dwarves were victorious in that war, the loss of Khazad-dûm still haunted them, and the dragon Smaug still occupied Erebor, draped over their ancestral horde like a cruel god. For decades, Thorin dreamed of reclaiming his birthright. He gathered followers, loyal kinsmen, and skilled warriors, many of whom had also lost their homes or families to Smaug's fire. They formed a close-knit company: Balin and Dwalin, sons of Fundin; Fili and Kili, Thorin's nephews; Glóin, father of Gimli; Owen, Dori, Nori, Ori, Bifur, Bofur, and Bombor. Each had their own reasons for joining Thorin's cause, but all were united by a shared sense of loss and the hope of reclaiming their stolen home. Yet even with their loyalty and skill, they were still only 13 dwarves, hardly enough to challenge a dragon. Thorin's dream required more than courage. it required a miracle. That miracle came in the unlikely form of a hobbit. It was Gandalf the Grey, one of the Istari sent by the Valar, to guide the free peoples of Middle-earth, who saw in Thorin's desire a greater purpose. Gandalf had long feared that Smaug could become a weapon for Sauron, should the Dark Lord rise again. If the dragon were driven from Erebor, it would not only restore the dwarves, it would weaken the enemy's hand. And so Gandalf proposed a bold and curious plan. He introduced Thorin to Bilbo Baggins, a quiet and comfort-loving hobbit of the Shire. Bilbo had never traveled, never fought, and never imagined himself in tales of kings and dragons. But Gandalf saw hidden potential in the hobbit, a cleverness, a courage yet untapped. Thorin was skeptical. The dwarves were baffled. But in time they agreed. Bilbo would join them as a burglar, a stealthy member of the company, who might enter Erebor unnoticed and discover what defenses or opportunities awaited within. And so in the spring of TA 2941, the quest of Erebor began. Their journey was perilous from the start. Crossing the wilds of Middle-earth, they encountered trolls, goblins, giant spiders, wargs, and the treacherous woods of Mirkwood. They were captured and imprisoned by Thranduil, the elven king of the woodland realm, whose grudge against the dwarves ran deep. Bilbo, to the company's astonishment, proved himself repeatedly, rescuing them from the goblins of the Misty Mountains, and later freeing them from Thranduil's dungeons, using barrels floating down the forest river. Along the way, Bilbo also encountered Gollum in the depths beneath the Misty Mountains. There he came into possession of a strange golden ring, a trinket that would later prove to be the One Ring, the darkest and most powerful artifact in all of Middle-earth. But for now, it was merely a tool that helped Bilbo avoid danger, vanish from sight, and grow into something more than he had ever imagined. The company finally reached Lake Town, built upon the Long Lake, near the ruins of Dale. The men of Lake Town, descendants of those who had fled Smaug's wrath, received Thorin with awe and hope. He spoke of reclaiming the mountain, of restoring prosperity, and forging new alliances. Thorin's presence ignited a sense of destiny. The master of Lake Town, ever eager for wealth and prestige, offered aid, boats, supplies, and praise. Thorin, once an exile, now stood on the edge of kingship. From there the company ascended to Erebor. They found the mountain cold, empty, and vast. The gates had long been sealed, the echo of footsteps swallowed by ancient silence. Smaug still dwelled deep within, coiled atop the dwarves' stolen gold. Bilbo, urged by Thorin, crept into the dragon's lair. There he saw the sheer immensity of the hoard, and the sleeping terror that guarded it. With cunning and stealth, Bilbo stole a cup from the treasure. But dragons are creatures of immense pride and memory. Smaug noticed the theft almost immediately. Enraged, he stormed from the mountain in search of the thief, believing Lake Town to be behind the intrusion. In his fury he flew to the town and unleashed fire upon its wooden homes. It was there that Bard, a descendant of the Lords of Dale, rose to meet fate. With a black arrow passed down from his forefathers, he struck Smaug in his only vulnerable spot, a bare patch in the hollow of his chest, discovered earlier by Bilbo. The dragon fell from the sky, crashing into the waters of the lake, dead at last. The threat was vanquished. But with Smaug's death came a new storm. Thorin, upon discovering the dragon gone, claimed the mountain and its hoard as his own. But the gold had lain too long under the weight of dragon malice. It shimmered with a madness that touched even Thorin's noble heart. He became obsessed with finding the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain, a glowing gem passed down from Durin himself. Unknown to him, Bilbo had taken it, fearing what it would do to Thorin. Word of Erebor's riches spread quickly. Bard, as the slayer of the dragon, sought a share of the treasure to rebuild Dale and aid the people of Lake Town, who had suffered Smaug's wrath. Thranduil of the woodland realm came too, with old grievances and claims. But Thorin, consumed by pride and possessiveness, refused them all. He sent word to his cousin Dain Ironfoot in the Iron Hills, calling for reinforcements. War loomed over the mountain. Bilbo, in a desperate attempt to make peace, secretly gave Bard the Arkenstone to use as leverage. Thorin's fury at the betrayal was immense. He cast Bilbo out, blind to the wisdom of his old friend. But before dying could arrive, a greater threat emerged. An army of orcs and wargs, sent by Sauron and led by Bolg, descended upon Erebor. They sought to seize the mountain and its wealth, and in the chaos, crush all who stood in their way. Thus began the battle of the five armies, dwarves, elves, men, orcs, and wargs clashing before the gates of Erebor. Thorin, stirred by the clash and perhaps by a final glimmer of clarity, donned his armor and led a charge from the mountain's gates. He fought with heroic fury, but the battle was brutal. Fili and Kili, his nephews, were slain defending him. Thorin himself faced Bolg in single combat and was mortally wounded. Bard slew Bolg, and with the timely arrival of Beorn and the eagles, the battle was won. As Thorin lay dying, he reconciled with Bilbo, recognizing at last the hobbit's loyalty, wisdom, and courage. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world, he said with his final breath. Thorin was buried deep within Erebor, with the Arkenstone upon his breast. Dying, Ironfoot became king under the mountain, ushering in a new era for Durin's folk. The quest of Erebor had succeeded, at a cost. A dragon was slain, a kingdom restored, but the scars of exile and the poison of pride lingered. Yet through it all, the dwarves endured, and from the ashes of their long wanderings, they rose again, tempered by hardship, redeemed by courage, and remembered in legend. As the shadow of Sauron grew once more in the east, spreading like a sickness across the lands of Middle-earth, the free peoples stirred to resist. The Third Age neared its end, and a final reckoning loomed. Yet while elves sailed west and men took center stage in the great battles of the age, the dwarves, the sons of stone and fire, did not stand idle. Though their deeds are not always sung in the halls of men, they too played a vital role in the struggle against the darkness. Their story, as ever, was one of resilience, loyalty, and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The death of Smaug and the victory at the Battle of the Five Armies had restored a measure of strength to Durin's folk. Dying Ironfoot, who had marched from the Iron Hills and fought bravely before Erebor's gates, became king under the mountain. Under his rule, Erebor was rebuilt, its forges were relit, its halls filled once more with the music of hammer and anvil. Trade resumed with the men of Dale, who also rebuilt their city under the leadership of Bard's descendants, creating a vibrant alliance between the two peoples. For a time, there was peace, but that peace was fleeting. In the shadows of Dol Guldur, in the desolate lands of Mordor, Sauron stirred. His eye turned north as well as south, for he had not forgotten the strength of the dwarves, nor the wealth of Erebor. If he could not wield them, he would destroy them. Yet the greatest mark of dwarven involvement in the War of the Ring was not made on the battlefield, but in the quiet, steadfast presence of one dwarf among a company of legends. Gimli, son of Glóin, was born in the restored halls of Erebor. His father had journeyed with Thorin on the quest of Erebor, and Gimli grew up with the tales of dragons, hobbits, and kings carved into his very bones. When Elrond called a council at Rivendell to decide the fate of the One Ring, Glóin and Gimli were among those who answered. The Council of Elrond brought together elves, men, dwarves, and hobbits, an alliance both necessary and uneasy. Old wounds lingered between elves and dwarves, especially with Thranduil, who still ruled the woodland realm to the east of Erebor, but amid the rising darkness, unity was vital. When the Fellowship of the Ring was formed to carry the ring to Mordor and destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom, Gimli was chosen to represent the dwarves. It was a decision that would carry unexpected consequences, not only for Middle-earth but for the dwarves themselves. Gimli, like many of his kin, harbored suspicion toward elves. Centuries of conflict and distrust weighed heavily on both races, but as the Fellowship journeyed south, through Moria, Lothlorien, and the wild lands of Rohan, Gimli began to see beyond the old divisions. It was in Lothlorien, the realm of Galadriel, that Gimli's heart changed. Expecting disdain or dismissal from the elves, he was instead met with kindness and grace. He grew to admire the elven queen deeply, and when offered a parting gift, he asked only for a single strand of her golden hair, a request she granted with a smile. In that moment, a bridge was formed between two ancient peoples. Gimli's friendship with Legolas, the elf of Mirkwood, was equally unexpected. At first they clashed, competitive, sarcastic, and wary.
But through shared trials, they grew close, eventually forging one of the deepest friendships in the entire saga. Their bond became a symbol of healing, proving that even the oldest wounds could be mended. While the fellowship fractured, and the ring-bearer continued his secret journey to Mount Doom, Gimli remained at the side of Aragorn and Legolas. He fought at the Battle of Helm's Deep, standing shoulder to shoulder with the men of Rohan. There, he and Legolas kept a running count of their kills, a grim contest laced with humor and camaraderie. Gimli also fought at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, where the forces of Sauron attempted to crush Gondor in a tide of fire and death. But it was in the paths of the dead, the haunted halls beneath the White Mountains, that Gimli's courage shone brightest. Though he trembled at the thought of walking among ghosts, he followed Aragorn without hesitation, honoring the oath he had sworn as a companion. In doing so, he helped secure the allegiance of the dead men of Dunharrow, a decisive act that would turn the tide of war. Though Gimli's journey is the most well-known Dwarven contribution to the War of the Ring, the broader efforts of Durin's folk must not be forgotten. While the great battles raged in the south, Sauron's armies struck north as well. Erebor and Dale were attacked by Easterlings, savage men corrupted by Sauron's lies and promises. King Dain and King Brand of Dale stood together in defense of their lands. In Tae 319, during the same days as the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, the Battle of Dale was fought. The two kings fought valiantly at the gates of Erebor, but both were slain, yet their deaths were not in vain. The Dwarves and men retreated into the mountain and held out against the siege until news came that Sauron had fallen. When the Dark Lord was defeated and the ring destroyed, the armies of the north scattered. The gates of Erebor opened once more, not in surrender but in triumph. Thorin III Stonehelm, son of Dain, became king under the mountain, and a new era of peace and prosperity began. Gimli, for his part, returned to Erebor for a time but did not remain there. His heart was changed by his journey. His loyalty to Aragorn and friendship with Legolas ran deep. When Aragorn became King Elisar of Gondor, Gimli led a group of dwarves south to Aglarond, the glittering caves of Helm's Deep, which he had fallen in love with during the war. There he founded a new colony of dwarves, becoming Lord of the Glittering Caves, and crafting wonders that rivaled the greatest works of Khazad-dûm. In time, it is said that Gimli, moved by his unbreakable bond with Legolas, was granted a rare and final honor. When Legolas set sail into the west, departing Middle-earth for the Undying Lands, he took Gimli with him. Thus, Gimli became the only dwarf ever known to cross the sea, a testament to how far his people had come, and how even the deepest chasms between races could be bridged by friendship. The War of the Ring had shaken the world. Kingdoms had fallen, new lines had been drawn, but the dwarves endured. They had fought in the north, while the world burned in the south. They had stood with their allies, reclaimed old homes, and helped build a future forged not only in stone, but in trust. In the quiet that followed the war, the forges of Erebor burned brightly once again. Trade flourished, the halls echoed with laughter, and the ring of steel, and in distant lands, where once dwarves were feared or distrusted, tales were told of a dwarf who walked with elves and fought for all free peoples. The legacy of Durin's folk lived on, stronger than ever. The fall of Sauron marked the end of the Third Age, and the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Middle-earth. The dawn of the Fourth Age, a time meant for the dominion of men. The elves began to leave the world, fading westward over the sea to Valinor, and the last echoes of their ancient kingdoms began to grow quiet. Magic diminished, great powers departed, but in the stone halls of the dwarves, beneath the mountains and deep within the bones of the world, the fires still burned. Durin's folk had endured the long twilight of exile, and emerged from the shadow with their honor intact. With the fall of Sauron and the death of Smaug, the great threats of the past had been vanquished. Now, with peace restored, and the free peoples rebuilding their lands, the dwarves could finally look not just backward to what was lost, but forward to what could still be forged. Thorin III Stonehelm, son of Dain Ironfoot, ruled Erebor with wisdom and strength. Under his reign, Erebor and Dale flourished as allies once more, a northern beacon of trade, culture and military strength. The treasures of the Lonely Mountain, long guarded and often fought over, were now shared in prosperity. The roads between Erebor and the Iron Hills were secure, the forges rang with industry, and the dwarves reasserted themselves as masters of craft and builders of wonders. Further west, Gimli, son of Glóin, established a thriving colony in the glittering caves of Aglarond beneath the Hornburg at Helm's Deep. These caves, which had enchanted Gimli during the War of the Ring, became a new jewel of Dwarven architecture. There, the dwarves carved halls of such beauty that even elves and men came to marvel at them. Gimli served as Lord of the Glittering Caves, and his people helped fortify and enrich the realm of Rohan. His friendship with Legolas became legend, a living symbol of peace between two ancient races once divided by suspicion and pride. Though the dwarves did not dominate the events of the Fourth Age, their influence was felt across the world. They repaired cities ruined by war, reforged ancient weapons, and carved monuments to victories long won. Their role shifted from warriors to restorers. In an age where power was increasingly held by men, the dwarves became honored allies, keepers of old wisdom and unmatched skill. But the memory of Moria, Khazad-dûm, the true home of Durin's line, still lingered in the hearts of Durin's folk. For over 1,000 years, it had remained a cursed and silent tomb, occupied by orcs and haunted by the memory of Durin's bane. Even after the Balrog had been destroyed by Gandalf, the dwarves did not rush to reclaim it. Too much blood had been spilled, and the darkness had taken deep root, yet there was hope. In the years after the War of the Ring, a new king arose, Durin VII, believed by many to be the reincarnation of Durin the Deathless himself, the first father of the Longbeards. Whether he truly bore the soul of the ancient king, or was simply a great leader of remarkable likeness, Durin VII inspired his people like no king since the early ages. His appearance marked a turning point. Durin VII led an expedition back to Khazad-dûm, and this time, the attempt did not end in silence. The dwarves returned to the halls beneath the misty mountains, driving out the remaining orcs and reclaiming the depths long lost. The forges of Khazad-dûm were relit, its ancient halls once again echoing with the sound of life. Mithril, once thought forever out of reach, flowed once more through the veins of the mountain. The kingdom of Durin was reborn, and Khazad-dûm, not Moria, resumed its true name. The reclamation of Khazad-dûm was not only a restoration of a city, it was the restoration of an identity. It symbolized everything the dwarves had endured: exile, loss, battle, and longing. They had outlasted dragons and demons, survived centuries of displacement and decline, and now, the very heart of their people beat again in the mountain where it had first begun. In the wider world, the dwarves remained few in number compared to men, and their language and customs became increasingly rare outside their own halls. Yet they never faded entirely. Their crafts remained unsurpassed, their legends remembered, and their loyalty respected. As men rose to prominence in the Fourth Age, the dwarves became the quiet strength beneath the world, enduring, unyielding, unforgotten. And what of the other houses of the dwarves? Though the histories of the Firebeards, Broadbeams, Ironfists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks, and Stonefoots were rarely recorded in detail by elves or men, they too endured. Some remained in the distant east, while others joined the Longbeards in Erebor and Khazad-dûm. The bonds of kinship held strong, and though scattered across the mountains of Middle-earth, the seven houses never forgot their shared origins. In times of need, they stood together, stone to stone, iron to iron. In the deep halls of their kingdoms, the dwarves continued to honor the memory of Aulë, the Vala who had shaped their first fathers from stone. They remembered the music of the Ainur and their unique place in the world, children not originally accounted for in the song, but welcomed and loved by Ilúvatar all the same. Their destiny was never tied to the elves or to the fate of men. It was their own, carved in stone, forged in fire, tested by time. And so, as the centuries passed, and the ages of the world turned like the wheels of a mighty forge, the dwarves remained. They remained in the mountain strongholds their ancestors had built with bleeding hands. They remained in the rings of mithril worn by kings, and in the stars reflected in the still waters of Keled-Zarum, where once Durin saw his crowned reflection. They remained in the songs sung around hearthfires, in the runes carved into steel, in the unbreakable line from father to son, hammer to anvil. The dwarves were never the rulers of Middle-earth. They never sought dominion over the world beyond their stone halls, but they shaped its foundations, they protected its treasures, they preserved its memory, and in the deep places of the earth, where the roots of mountains touch the fires of the world, the legacy of the dwarves endures not as conquerors, but as creators, not as fleeting kings, but as the children of stone, whose stories are carved not in ink or song, but in stone walls that will stand long after all others crumble.